Pete Hammond here for Half Hour With, and today we're going to spend a half hour talking about Frida. This is from our friends at Amazon MGM Studios, available to be seen on Prime Video right now, and a fascinating documentary. And I have to say, I'm surprised that until now there really hasn't been a major feature documentary on Frida Kahlo because she is so iconic and there's so much to deal with in her extraordinary life. Today, we have the film's director and I should say editor, Carla Gutierrez, is with us. Hi, Carla.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
The reason I said editor is this is your feature film debut as a director, but you are a celebrated film editor of such movies as RBG and many others that you've done. Julia on Julia Child. You've worked with your producers here on this movie, on their movies that they directed. Now it's your shot here as the director, which is very exciting. Congratulations on
Thank you.
Frida. Yeah. So before I show the trailer to give people an idea of what you have wrought here, tell us a little bit about how you decided to make this your directing debut, how this even came about.
So the whole concept of our film is to really let Frida tell her own story. So it's the film itself is all told through the words, the written words of Frida, and it was really that concept that I hadn't seen in film before in documentaries that made me want to jump into the directing role. I had been somebody who had been like many young women around the world have been incredibly obsessed with Frida when I was young. And so when I had the idea, I went back to the books that I read and I saw enough fragments of her writings that I thought, oh my God, she can tell her story herself. And that's how it all started, really. And that's when we started the research and she could definitely tell her own story. She would not let go of that mic once we gave it to her.
I mentioned your producers here, Julie Cohen and Betsy West, who did RBG, just fabulous documentary there, and Julia and others that you have a working relationship were. Were they sort of mentoring you in this as producers? Or how did that relationship work?
So they're executive producers. So they didn't handle the day-to-day production work, but they were the first people that I went to once I had the idea. The first people that I called were Julie and Betsy, and it was just so exciting to hear them so enthusiastic about me taking the lead and me directing my first film, which gave me also a lot of confidence. I was just like, yes, I do know how to do these things. And we went out with the film together. So they were definitely, people that really lifted up the vision and that supported me throughout. And I always love getting notes from Julie and Betsy. And they're so much fun to work with. It's just so great to just be in the same room with them. So
Yeah.
it was fantastic to bring the team together again.
Well, this undoubtedly had your vision 100% on this, and you save money on hiring an editor. Um, which is
I ended up hiring an amazing supervising editor, so I don't know how.
oh, okay. Okay, but you can't keep your hands off the editing process. That comes in really valuable, I would imagine, by the way, when you're directing a film to be able, you're like Steven Soderbergh. I mean, that's what he does. So,
Yeah, I mean, I think that the experience of knowing, of like visualizing the film from an editor's point of view, it gives you a lot of, really understanding of the vision really early on, and it allows you to make like really bold but very, decisive, choices.
let's take a look at the trailer right now, give people a taste of Frida. Here we go.
Me pinto a mí misma porque soy lo que mejor conozco. Pintaré lo que me dé la gana, con mis propios ojos y nada más. El camión que me aplastó me desbarató los huesos. Después del accidente, la emoción clara y precisa que yo guardaba de la Revolución Mexicana fue la base para mi determinación. El amor es la base de toda vida. El noviazgo con Diego comenzó. Me dan ganas de hacer el amor, tomarme un baño y hacer el amor de nuevo. Necesito pintar para vender mis cuadros. Nunca aceptaré dinero de ningún hombre hasta que muera. Así podré ser libre. Nunca pintaba mis sueños. Pintaba mi propia realidad. Muchas vidas no serían suficientes para pintar todo lo que yo quisiera.
The voice over here, the use of the voiceover artists and actors throughout, including Fernanda, who's the voice of Frida. This is all in Frida's own words, the whole thing, which I think gives it such gravitas. It's such an you touched on it in the beginning here, but to have that that actor you hired, how difficult was it to find the voice you envisioned here for the movie?
Um, so we had, I think, a little bit of freedom because we actually do not have recordings of Frida's voice. We had so many photos of her. We know her face so well. Um, but that allowed us to, to really look for an intense performance and not necessarily try to match her voice. Um, and we work with an amazing casting director who has a lot of connections in the theater world in Mexico. So we were really looking for talent not only in film but also TV and theater, and that's how we came across Fernanda. We had, a couple of amazing auditions, but it was Fernanda's voice that really captured that essence that we were looking for, which was, um, how do we find somebody, the voice of a woman who had lived through so much pain and so much suffering, but at the same time had never let go, had never lost that passion and curiosity and rebelliousness that she had from when she was a little girl. And Fernanda's performance just really kind of like, hit it out of the park with her audition. And when we put her voice against the images, the archival images that we had of Frida, it was just magic.
Amazing.
The,
Yeah.
the funny story is that, in the process of editing, you need to try a lot of different things. So we needed scratch voiceover. So we used our entire team was voicing the characters in our films.
Yeah.
And sometimes that was a little hard because we're not actors, but I ended up having to voice Frida because it was the easiest voice. I would record at 11 p.m. or at midnight when we were on deadlines. And I didn't completely suck, but the day that we replaced my voice with Fernanda, it was a beautiful, wonderful, wonderful day.
It was all there. Yeah. Why do you think it's taken so long for a documentary like this to be made? We all know the Selma Hayek was nominated for an Academy Award playing her in a narrative movie version of her life, but it seems like this has been a long time coming. I don't know why.
Mhm. So actually, documentaries do exist. There was one big PBS documentary, I think, in the mid 90s. And there's been a couple of documentaries that have come out in the last, I would say, 7 years or so. I think what has been special about ours is that all those documentaries were, told through the distance of time and really told through experts telling us how to think about Frida or telling us about what happened
Right.
life. So they were
Exactly.
all academics. So the type of documentary, the type of film that we're presenting is definitely new and unique. And it is the first time that, some of those documentaries have used some quotes from her, but this is really the first time where all of the narration is happening through her own words and her own voice. So the films feel really different. And, they've done extraordinary academic work, but it was our, intention and really was the goal to, find some kind of intimacy with Frida. I really wanted the audience to be sitting with her and her whispering her secrets to us. And so this hasn't been done before, and I hope that people are liking it. Yeah.
Oh, I think so. And also, as opposed to a lot of documentaries that are done about painters and are that
Mhm.
in the art world, they're necessarily static when you're looking at paintings.
Mm.
Not in this case, which I thought was one of the really impressive aspects of it. The use of animation in
Thank you.
bringing all of these paintings to life is extraordinary. There's so much movement, it's such a visual medium, and your visual choices here, in addition to your other textural and other choices, really seems right on.
Thank you. I love how you're describing it as like a very visual medium. It was, we wanted to make sure that her paintings that are so powerful and so detailed and so full with her personal emotions and feelings really translated into a cinematic space. We have different experiences when we are in front of a painting in a museum. We can sit with it for a long time. We can have a conversation. But then when you bring something in a film, the story is happening, the story is moving forward, and we wanted to make sure that the audience was guided through that emotional content of the paintings. I remember very clearly when we made the decision, which was one of the first decisions we made, because as you know, animation is expensive, so you really have to plan for it. But I remember describing it as, I want the audience to actually like physically dive into her internal world, like if it was a pool of emotions, of Frida's emotions, or her heart, even like, bloody and all of it. I just want us to like just jump in and then be able to swim around it. And so that was, for me, animation was a way to really kind of create that sense, that immersiveness into her personal feelings.
It's interesting too because you mix all that in with the archival material, which is incredible, the level of archival material you had, and also, black and white documentary kind of footage. Like, for instance, when she gets in the bus crash, and there's all of that, and that whole sequence is fascinating. I didn't know that's what caused the pain that stayed with her whole life. It's such a key point in talking about Frida, how she overcame that, how she dealt with that. And the way that's presented in the film here is really interesting. Talk about that sequence and doing that.
Yeah, so the entire film is through her own words, but visually is really the archival and her art. So we took advantage of, like, I had this vision of, this is gonna be in black and white because in the 1920s, 1930s, that's the material that is available. But what an amazing opportunity to then be able to kind of like have this explosion of color and explosion of like colorful, intense, passionate feelings when we go into her art. And then we use that to our advantage. The scene that you're describing, you see the traffic in the middle of Mexico City. You see all the trolleys because this was an accident when a trolley went against the bus where she was traveling in. And so you see that traffic, and then it becomes a little bit abstract. The sound goes away, it's kind of like sped up traffic. But then we just jump right into one of her paintings called The Broken Column,
Right.
that she painted many, many years later. And then the crash happens with her column crashing and like everything exploding. And so you get the sense of that, of the trolley and the bus going against each other, but it is her body that is feeling that crash. And we use those kind of like jumping points from archival into what's happening with her internally a lot in the film, depending of the emotion that we were going for. I mean, she could never paint the crash itself in kind of like a literal way, but she presented her physical state that was a result of the crash, in a lot of paintings. And she kind of like opened herself up and showed you her, her bones, her what was happening internally, and you could really feel the pain.
So much self-portrait. I mean, as an artist, she really never apologized for that, and doubled down on doing that, what that meant to her, and what you're describing there, those scenes of taking trauma in her life and putting it in those scenes. You're really giving voice to the artist, to the inspiration, to you're putting yourself in her head and her creativity here in that. You're taking some license as a filmmaker to put what you think's in her head, I think, right?
Yeah, but that was, it was amazing because since I really, was so interested in her when I was a young woman, and throughout my life, I've always connected to, very intensely connected to many of her paintings. Um, I knew about her life, I knew all the details of her life, but it was a huge difference to be able to read all of her letters and all of her writings, and, to really pay attention to her diary and some essays that she wrote. And I got to know her in a much more intimate way. And you're right, that was the intention, to get into her head and to have, you know, again, and I will say it again, but like, how do we get into her heart?
Right.
Um, because it was her heart that, I felt like she bled her feelings into the canvas. But reading those letters, I mean, I was able to really hear her fragility, even when she was really scared, when she was these feelings that all women have. And I think that it is always her face, it is always the self-portraits, but I think her art has such a power of connecting and showing us our own feelings back to us. That's the experience that I've had with her art. And I wanted the film to carry some of that as well.
I thought the part where she's talking about wanting to be a mother with Diego Rivera, her husband, very important to her, which I didn't realize, and that really comes through here. You really get the feeling, this is what she wants to do for him. I think in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I remember reading that there's a long letter. There's actually two letters that she sends to her doctor, a doctor that became a good friend of hers. So she was very vulnerable in those letters about her physical condition, but also about her fears. And I remember reading those letters, and I just really cried a lot, because as a woman, I've had those same questions, like how is this big change in my life going to change my relationships? How is going to change my life, right? But I also want to be a mother. These are like, things that we deal with, just normal things that a lot of women deal with, but we don't talk about. Um, and yeah, so that was really important to show, for her fragility, but also how courageous she was to live through through such a big loss for her, and then paint it. And I
Right.
think for me, that was the transformation. That's when she became an art, like a true artist, like that, the paintings after the miscarriage and what happens throughout the rest of her artistic life. That to me was the moment where she actually found her voice as an artist. And also as a woman, I'm so grateful that she painted her miscarriage. We don't talk about miscarriages
Oh,
amongst ourselves even. And this was in the 1930s, and she just put it out there. This is what happened to me. This is what happened to my body. This is the pain that I'm feeling. And that takes courage.
definitely. And while we're talking about Diego Rivera, of course, this revered artist himself, their relationship's fascinating. And I thought there's a level of humor you bring into this film that I thought was very funny. Yeah, there's a lot of serious stuff and everything, but don't discount the humor that you put in here, and particularly in that, and talking about all the affairs and all the women, and how she basically knows,
Mhm.
this one's kind of like, forget it, I'll get him back on this, and all of that. And there was that kind of play that was going
Yeah.
on here.
I mean, it's also, I think we were guiding by her voice too, because she just had such a biting, I mean, she could just not shut up. And then maybe that's why I connect with her a little bit too much as well. Uh, but she just had such a humor in dealing with harsh things in her life as well, or like I mean, the way that she insulted some people, it was just like so fascinating and funny. I even been saying because it's true. I learned a couple of swear words. Maybe they're Mexican slang that I hadn't heard before. I thought I knew it all, but apparently I didn't. Um, and yes, I mean, I, we just really wanted to bring these people to life and in all their complexities, but also not be afraid of like, finding funny moments and like humorous moments. I mean, but I really wanted people to understand why these two people were so attracted to each other.
Right, yeah.
When you only see the photograph is big Diego and like tiny little Frida, and
Right.
Frida is considered like a beauty nowadays, not back then in Mexico. And and a lot of people cannot understand how Diego got so many women, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
when you actually get to hear their personalities, you get it. Like
yeah.
they were always like, their humor was very similar, and they always kind of like, played up with each other so much.
uh,
And I wanted people to really understand what was the electricity between them two. There was one person that I love this comment. There was one person that watched the film and said, "Oh my God, this is the first time I actually thought Diego was kind of sexy." And I was like, yes.
let's take another look at another sequence from the film. Here's Frida.
Nunca aceptaré dinero de ningún hombre hasta que muera. Me pinto a mí misma porque soy lo que mejor conozco. Mis autorretratos son la expresión exacta de mi emoción. Me dijeron que no debería pintar siempre tantas cosas tristes. Pero yo pintaré lo que me dé la gana, aunque las pinturas no se vendan.
So beautifully done. I just love all that movement and everything. What was your initial inspiration with Frida, painting wise? Was there one painting that you saw in your younger days that said, "Oh my God, who is this? Who did this?" Something that you personally could totally relate to?
Yeah, I actually discovered her through her one of her paintings. Most of I think most people nowadays, because she's really everywhere and she's become a symbol of female empowerment, but also of sexiness.
Right.
Um, there's no one place in New York where you walk around and you'll see her looking at you, on
On
a
handbags and all kinds of things.
everywhere, like stickers on the wall. There's anime versions of Frida everywhere. But I got to know her through one of her paintings, the painting it's called La Frontera, where she's in between the United States and Mexico. And I had that same reaction. I was a young immigrant at the time, and I just kind of really saw myself in that painting. She had mixed feelings about the United States, and she always missed and romanticized Mexico. And at the time I saw that painting, I was kind of going through the same feelings. I was a new immigrant learning English, didn't quite feel very comfortable in this place. People were calling me like, immigrant, like you're kind of like a foreigner, outsider type of person. So I just love that painting because I saw my own experience in that painting. And then, but now, for example, I'm really very much connecting to the two Fridas. And throughout my life I've connected to different paintings, but the two Fridas, she's holding herself as her heart is, she's heartbroken, and it feels really mature. And for women, like the experience of a heart being broken is very different when you're, in your 40s, you're in midlife, than when you are, relationships are more mature. They're very different than when you are a young teenager, right?
Yeah.
So I think that I've always found refuge in some of her paintings, and always come back to them as a way of, sometimes releasing my own feelings a little bit.
Can you also talk about the fact that I know you did much of the production here. You wanted to do it in Mexico. You wanted to be there, and
Mhm.
also the crew, your production staff, everybody is really Latino, Latinx. You're really holding up the flag here in making it authentic in terms of who you hired and who worked on this film.
Yeah, our creative team, I mean, we had, amazing producers and producing partners that are, American companies. But our creative, the little creative team that we put together for this film is mostly Latinx. From my producer, associate producer, archival producer, assistant editor, composer. It was just like a sense of pride to be able to, like, you know find and hire amazing talent that also had some kind of cultural connection to the subject matter that we were, the story that we were telling. um you know I mean, we also work you know with non-Latinos. I can think of my supervising editor, David T, who, was instrumental in finding the voice for the film. Our colorist, who lives in Mexico, but he's a gringo. It was just really wonderful to be able to also seek Mexican talent to work with. I wanted to inject as much Mexico into this film as possible, and also be able to, like, be Mexico as much as we could, and learn. And I am Latina. I have a familiarity with that world, with the world that created Frida. But there was a lot of research to really understand the context, the time, that she grew up in, and the context, and the cultural, like, really deep cultural understanding of Mexico. Every place is different, and every place is complicated in its own way. And
Also, you mentioned a lot of your collaborators here, and I just want to point out some tremendous work with sound mixing on this and the music, the score, and the choice of music. It's excellent,
thank
really
you.
adding to the atmosphere.
And that talent was all Mexican. So our
Yeah.
composer is from Michoacan, and all the sound design we did in Mexico with a Mexican team. And but the lead is Colombian. So
Ah,
yeah.
very cool, very cool. Well, before we go, I have one more question that we always like to ask, which is if somebody hasn't seen it, they're not familiar, what do you hope they take away from the experience of seeing your Frida here, your film?
So, I mean, obviously, our film is about somebody that is so well known, somebody that is iconic. Some people will come to the film, at least knowing her image or knowing her face. Maybe they don't know too much about her life. But ultimately, the film is really about a woman who decided not to limit her voice, not to contain her voice. And that's what I would love audiences to connect with, and especially women and non-binary people to really connect with. That it is important for us to look inwards sometimes, and to let that out, let our feelings out. It's cathartic and it's a good thing. Sometimes we need to let it out in anger. Sometimes we need to let it out with care and and kindness. But that expression, that self-expression, is always a good thing, and we need to seek it out. And because Frida is such a great example of somebody that did not contain her voice and gave us wonderful art because of it.
Amazing. Well, available to see on Prime Video. And thank you to MGM Amazon Studios today for our half hour with Carla Gutierrez. Thank you for joining us. And
Yeah.
best of luck with this film as more people get to see it, and they get to see it globally, which is the great thing about where you have this film right now. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This was wonderful. Thanks.